Today we're going to be tackling a topic that I think a lot of people talk about. Friends after the age of 30, making friends, finding people is just really hard. Any reason why, in particular, recently for you, this kind of came up and you decided to write the blog article on it?
I thought of this topic because I was just recently trying to get in touch with an old high school friend, and long story short, he was in his car driving back from work, and then he said that that's pretty much the only time that he can have to talk to me before he goes into the house with his wife and kids. And I thought, oh man, that's sad. He's a busy dentist during the day, and it just seemed like that was his life, right? Like half of his time was spent on his career and providing for his family, and then the other half on taking care of his family. And then it made me think about some other friends in similar predicaments. And then in the past, you and I, we've also talked about this epidemic of loneliness, which is affects both men and women, but particularly men who have a more difficult time with making friends and maintaining friendships as they get older. So I thought, yeah, let's talk about this topic.
Yeah, but if you have kids, especially between the ages of 1 to 15 or 16, when they don't want to be around you anymore, the struggle is real. Yeah.
I think most of us, we have friends from, let's say, high school, college, or professional school. And not to say it's easy to make friends during those times, but compared to the time afterward, it's relatively easier to make friends during that time when you're not saddled with so many obligations. And you're also in this environment where you're spending a lot of time with different people. The kind of ecosystem it's really hard to come by once you finish schooling. So I think for most of us who've moved on and are working, we have like different social circles, right? We might have people that we see at work, we might have people that we hang out at the gym, we might have people that we see on the sports fields while our kids are doing their activities. So it's kind of like different, like separate groups. It's possible to make friends, but it's just harder because your time is split into among various obligations.
A recent book I was reading, Mel Robbins' Let Them Theory. She talks about the three frameworks of friends, how they're put together. The first one is proximity, so you're around them, right? Like in college, you're literally around them all the time. The next one is timing. You got time, go to something. And then the last one is energy. Some
Yeah.
people just aren't down to make friends. I see that us with young kids now in getting to elementary school, the parents still hang out to some extent. So the kids are all around. There's literally proximity there. Obviously, it's timing in the lives. And then the other thing is the energy. Some people aren't really or haven't figured it out yet, or that's not what they're looking for.
I think for most of the people I've talked to, they have their close friends from their days in school, whether high school, university, or professional school, and those sort of form your core group of friends. So unless you're staying in the same geographical area as everyone and everyone stays put, it's perhaps not too big of an issue. But for a lot of folks, people move on with their lives, right? People move to different places, people relocate, you might relocate. And so people go on their own paths. And it just becomes harder and harder to keep in touch with these people. And a lot of times you don't have that proximity that you mentioned. And I think particularly this hits hard for a lot of guys, a lot of men that I've talked to. And I think it's because a lot of men, they feel like, I think society instills this belief into them that like you should be pouring your main energy into your work or like providing for your family. And oftentimes this sort of mindset leaves like less room or little room, if not like social permission to build and maintain friendships outside of those two spheres. And if we think about it, that's a very vulnerable position to be in, right? Especially if a lot of your friends have moved away. If your two main pillars are number one, work, and number two, family, right? If something happens to your job, your health, something happens to your marriage, if either one of those pillars collapses, then you're left in a really vulnerable position, right? If you don't have a social support network to get you through really tough times. Yeah.
Yeah, I would actually maybe even challenge that men or just people in general focus on what they do well. And if they kick butt at work or their business, they will plow more energy because they're getting the ROI in that. There's a feedback loop and a very positive one where some things like building friendships are a lot more of an organic process that you can't really force and you can't really type A personality your way there. So some people may see it as a less of opportunity or less of a avenue to if I put in X amount of energy, I'm going to get X amount of return. And they subconsciously know they're not as good at it, so they shy away from it. But I would agree, we're all like one bad incident from being out there on the Tinder apps or whatever apps it may be, or like finding new friends. And when you take your finances, looking at you have redundancies, you have insurances, but why would you not do that with your social component? And we all know how important the social component of your life wheel is.
And that vulnerability is it's borne out by statistics, right? So we know that the suicide rate, especially among men who've lost their jobs or men who even have voluntarily retired, it's pretty high. And we also know that the suicide rate for men who've gone through a divorce is significantly higher than that for women, because women in general, they're just better at maintaining and keeping friends, so they have a much better social support network to get them through difficult times.
And I would say maybe it's more that they are more emotional and outward expressing. I know some are on different sides of the spectrum, but I'm just saying generalities here. But I'm pointing that out as if you're more like myself, who's not on that spectrum, if you want to make friends because you think everything we're saying makes a lot of sense, then it would make sense to get out of your comfort zone and get more to that spectrum of more outgoing, more expressive, more emotional.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, let's get into these. Like, you've got 5 hidden rules of adult friendship. You were able to break this down a little bit. I think obviously we want people to have the takeaway of this is obviously very important, but maybe let's dig beneath the surface a little bit here.
Yeah, let's do it. 5 hidden rules of adult friendship. Number one is friendship requires repetition. And so it's no secret that to become friends with somebody, you really need to spend time with somebody. And in general, the more time you spend with somebody, the more you're gonna like each other. Right? You're gonna figure out if you like or dislike each other. But real connection requires repeated exposure. And this is why in school, it's you're in that environment where you see people regularly. You're in an environment that naturally fosters friendship. So it's a lot more difficult as adults to have this type of environment. So we have to create it deliberately.
So I'll say, like when we do our retreats, it is a social engineering experiment that we've got time tested. People come in, we do the evening cocktail thing the first day, and then we spend the entire day together on the Circle Island tour. And then by the day, that's when the magic happens. My theory is I saw this guy one day, and the next day I hung out with him. He didn't steal my stuff. And by the third time, maybe it's just the third instance. Another instance of this is you got young kids and you're going to some kid's birthday party, which seems to be the social life of 40-year-olds these days. Nobody is talking to each other, especially if there's no booze or alcohol at the party. As a young kids party, you typically don't. You see each other, you say hello, you don't know how to react. A lot of people are they haven't hung out with anybody in 5 years, right? So they're a little rusty. But yeah, I would attest to the rule of three. Like by the time you see them for the second time, and then the third time, you're like, all right, I gotta deal with this person, feel comfortable. I think that's the big thing is the comfort.
So the second hidden rule of adult friendship is that friendship grows in unstructured, quote unquote, wasted time. Right? So the deepest bonds typically form in unplanned, low pressure moments. So being bored together, like figuring out, okay, what's next? What do you want to do now? And this can be difficult for type A individuals because a lot of us were about efficiency, results, having things scheduled on our calendars. But when we live on that level, it keeps things surface level.
I wanted to interject. I was passing along this article with my friends this past weekend. It's definitely a tangent, but so the headline here is psychology says people who have no close friends aren't usually social incompetent. They have a pattern recognition ability that makes small talk feel like cognitive torture. And I would probably put myself in this category. Long story short, what they're saying here is, I'm not going to say smarter people, but some people who are a little bit more tuned to pattern recognition are getting into like, all right, I see how this conversation is going. I literally was reading this article in an Uber ride and I was like, oh, good Lord, I'm like, this is like torture to me because we're talking about just nonsense. I'm like, is this talking and expending energy going to lead me to anywhere? And a lot of it, when it's surface level, small talk, the people who are good at pattern recognition are like, this is not a good ROI for me. Therefore, I should stop. But it's not saying that you're not socially adept, is basically what it's saying.
Right.
You don't need more friends, you just need the right ones. They don't want to interact. They want to get to that deeper level. But part of this whole thing is you got to go through the foreplay. Is that how you see
Yeah,
it?
I think most of us crave deeper friendships, like meaning over superficiality. But yeah, you gotta do the small talk before you get to the big talk or the deeper stuff, unfortunately.
I've met some unique individuals and they are able to go 0 to 60 in 3.2 seconds and get really deep with people. Some just have a natural tact at it. Some like they just I've met somebody who just automatically just says, hey, they just start asking like really deep questions. And plus they share really deep things first. They divulge things first, they bridge that gap first. I think that's a tactic that people can use. But they make it very clear that this is not going to be service level, and if you can't hang, you need to leave now, which alienates a lot of people for sure.
Yeah, but that's actually a tool and a tactic that's actually quite effective, and you can weed out like who's who. But it's definitely a tactic, and we'll get to more of these practical tools later. But that's exactly one of the ones that we have on the list here.
Yeah, let's go to number 3 then.
All right. So third hidden rule of adult friendship is that it's kind of related to what we were just talking about, is that friendship deepens through gradual vulnerability. And so connection strengthens when we share honestly and allow ourselves to be really seen. Not necessarily all at once, but in small, consistent doses. So as many of us age, we sort of default to self-protection and filtering, and this slows bonding. Right? So the rule is to practice safe incremental openness because this invites reciprocity, and then this is how you turn acquaintances into real friends.
I think we all know, but stay away from the guy who brags a lot, or the one upper, they call him, or the humble bragger. Nobody likes that guy. And if that's, you need to stop because nobody likes that. It's not that you're a bad person, it's just you have these kind of tendencies that you do that. But that is exactly the reason here of why rule number 3, be vulnerable, is such a tactic, and it works because the converse or the inverse of it is true too in this case.
And that reminds me of something I learned once about one of the tips to get someone to like you is to ask them for help on something. Right. So number one, that shows a little bit of vulnerability that, hey, like you're not good at something and you're asking for help. And when you ask for help, that makes the other person feel good. Right? It stokes their ego and allows them to be significant and to be helpful for you. Yeah. So that's probably a better way than the anti-example that you just gave, which is to brag and to show off all your accomplishments.
A lot of these tactics, it can be seen as like manipulating people and Jedi mind tricks. And yeah, it should be used for good, obviously.
Yeah.
Some of these I guess this goes in the NLP, neuroprogramming, right,
Programming,
which
yeah.
is known as to be a very negative thing and manipulative. They'll use this in these seminars. I won't name the names out there, but they'll start the seminar and they'll put somebody in the crowd, and they'll plant, they call them. They'll plant this person, and then this person will just start off the seminar in the first hour. They'll call on him from the crowd, and he or she will just share this incredibly vulnerable story. And what that does is just drops the level of vulnerability for the room and sets the tone for the rest of the seminar. And by then, you're buying everything. But these are time-tested tactics that do work.
So the fourth hidden rule of adult friendship is that, especially for adults, friendship has to be built intentionally. You're no longer in that type of environment like school where it can happen more organically. Most of us were pulled in a bunch of different directions throughout the day. So waiting for friendships to just happen is most likely going to just end up in a lot of waiting around and loneliness. Right? So as an adult, you need to take effort, you need to take initiative, and you need to show up consistently. There's no way around that.
Yeah, we should probably do a future podcast, especially when the kids are older, of the whole high school BS, right? Click thing. How things are very different in high school versus college in the real world. But some idea just came to my head. I remember in like elementary school when you'd go around, you get your yearbook signed by all your friends. And I remember some kids were always, and they tended to be the cooler kids. I don't know why, that they wouldn't walk around and get their yearbook signed. They just sit their butts down and have people come to them, which worked. It worked
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah.
But yeah, when adulthood, that is like That don't fly.
That doesn't fly.
The
And the
only people
fifth,
that's going to attract if you do that are like the bottom feeders. I think in adulthood, perhaps.
and the fifth hidden rule of adult friendship is that if you want to accelerate bonding, go do a shared experience with some sort of light pressure. The fastest way to form friendships is by doing something together rather than just talking. And so, group activities, classes, workouts, or some sort of shared challenge creates natural interaction. It allows for coordination and repeated contact. And this, in turn, lowers friction and allows people to build trust more quickly.
Yeah, the most extreme example of this is you've seen the movie Speed, right? With Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. They go
Yeah.
on this like high tension adventure movie together with a bomb on the bus. And
Yeah.
after that, they fall in love and they kiss. That's just textbook rule number five here, right?
Yeah.
If you can get your kids around doing something with them, you're setting yourself up the opportunity to do this. And if there's a somewhat of an element of danger, like when we did like this investor trip up to the mountains and it was dangerous, I was driving and it was just enough long enough and just enough dangerous enough to create that unintentional.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've done this with your kids, parents, and peers. Anything that's created this, give people some ideas.
It's not easy.
A lot of times I think you and I are the ones leading the interaction.
Yeah.
So you may be a little bit more adaptive to stress, where when you're leading somebody else or you're trying to interact with other people, they may not be willing to go to the a higher threshold. But that's somewhat what's necessary, is what we're saying here.
I'm thinking about some of the other parents I've met through my kids swimming. The ones that I've made friends with are the ones who are actually there swimming as well. Huh. I jump in as well, swimming in the same lane, and then you start to make small talk with each other. You see each other more regularly, and then you start to say, "Hey, I'm swimming on Saturday. You want to come?" Right? And then if you think about it, you've unintentionally created this environment where you have that what we talked about, which is like the proximity and the repetition. There's no expectation that something's going to happen. It just happens, and you're doing something together, and then that just leads to an increased chance of friendship.
Yeah. I think what makes this is very much like finding a mate, right? And dating. Yet there's so much more of an urge and a draw to that that it's a lot more motivating, where this is not immediately motivating as much as that, but perhaps maybe even more important long term.
Yeah, and I agree about the whole mating strategy, especially with dating apps these days. Like oftentimes as adults, we do the opposite, right? A lot of times we assess first and then maybe we spend time later, right? Kind of like these dating apps where nowadays it's just absurd. You look at a few metrics and you start weeding out people just right off the bat.
What I'll do right now, I'll model maybe a six rule
Yeah.
is like positivity, right? Because nobody likes people who make snarky comments about the gym here or how the school is running this or how Chuck E. Cheese needs to get another worker. I get it. You're smart. You like to make snarky comments. Amazing. But that repels people. But yeah, you are going back and forth with online dating, right? I think it's crazy too. But something real life that I found was I was talking to a Gen Zer and she was like, "That's cool. Like some of the apps, they're programmed where like you get matched up with your hotness level. So
Mm,
there's none of this like shooting over your weight class.
mm,
Always on there, and you're always finding people that are in your range, which is how the natural world of selection typically works. Although there are some outliers out there for sure." But from that perspective, I was like, oh, online dating actually does a good job at this because unfortunately in the wild, you have people.
yeah,
I haven't used that stuff, but I was
yeah.
like, that's good. I was like, this is a good thing.
We'll have to do another episode on this topic because I think we
Yeah.
could, yeah, this
Yeah.
is, we could talk a lot about that.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about what are some practical things that folks can do, right? What actually works, right? If you're looking to try to make new friends, not just superficial friends, but close friends, deep friends, right? So number one is you want to engineer repetition on purpose, right? So for example, pick one recurring activity that happens at the same time, same place, same people, right? So for example, weekly class, like a standing group workout or even a monthly gathering. Consistency is everything. And again, we're talking about building friends requires time. There's no way around that. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll do. My kids got like gymnastics, so we that's a standing thing once per week.
Yeah.
But I was thinking the other day of just having them just sending them because looking back on the first kid, we met a lot of neat people just going through that establishment.
Yeah.
Some people are like, oh, that's a waste of money. But look, grand scheme of things, you paying that money for daycare and you meet somebody. And I've talked to some people recently who are in our group that are 50s and 60s. And some of them have met a lot of their best friends through when the kids were really young playing soccer.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's crazy to think that they would have never had those connections if they wouldn't have put them in some silly league for a summer, right?
So another idea that can give you good results is choose environments that create unstructured time and shared doing. So instead of going to a loud bar or some sort of forced networking event, think instead about leaning into an interaction setting such as like a group fitness class, cooking class, yoga class, whatever you're into, volunteering, walk and talk formats, right? For example, we've talked about in a previous episode the benefits of walk and talk masterminds. All these settings allow for conversation to flow naturally around an activity.
Book clubs are
Mhm.
similar to that.
Yeah.
I would just put this into Chat GPT and things you like to do and environments that are conducive and just have it give you some suggestions based on your own preferences.
So next tip is assume that people like you and act like it. So research shows that as a whole, we systematically tend to underestimate how much others enjoy our company, right? And this mindset oftentimes will reduce hesitation and make you warmer and more initiating. This is particularly important to know, especially for those of us who might feel a little rusty in social situations and feel a little awkward. Just assume that people like you and just go out there and be yourself.
And assume that other people are just as awkward as you, especially if you have like younger kids and you've been out of the game for 5 to 10 to 20 years. Everybody's the same.
Yeah.
Everybody's not super cool. So be the
Yeah.
one, be the leader, right? I think a lot of you guys are the ones listening to the podcasts, trying to do personal development. You're the ones who have to take the lead. And if you go with the attitude of I'm just gonna go 50% and hope my other buddy who I haven't seen in 10 years also goes 50%, nothing will ever happen. You have to take 99% of this ownership.
Which actually relates to our next tip, which is be the leader, initiate clearly and specifically. So instead of saying to someone, hey, we should hang out sometime, or let's go grab coffee sometime, be specific. Say, hey, I am free next Thursday evening. You want to join me for a walk or a quick bite? So being specific lowers the friction for the other person. Be the leader, take the initiative, make it easy for the other person to come into your sphere.
I do the three rule where like I'll ask, hey Paul, do you want to do this? And you turn me down, and I'm gonna ask you again next week or the week after. And then depending on what you tell me, right? Oh, I have this. That's a legitimate reason. I'll try again. But if I go more than 3 times, I'm like, all right, I need to spend my time and energy talking to another guy or gal or whatever.
Yeah.
And another thing that somebody told me this is, hey, just invite everybody over, and when the party's over, most people will leave, but some people will hang out longer and longer, and it's a self-selection thing.
Yeah, that's related to another one of our tips, which is okay, it's about being a leader, right? So host small and repeatable, right? So in other words, do something like where you invite, let's say, 3 to 6 people over for something low key. Make it semi-regular. You become the natural hub. That's the advantage of being the leader and doing this. And to what you were just saying, when you have this kind of environment, then you're more likely going to have someone that wants to stick around after.
But the way I look at this, I'm also in more professional groups, and there's a lot of people in that. You figure out who kind of resonates with you. And at that point, what I normally do is we bring the spouses in. And it typically surrounds like who has kids, some similar ages. And then we'll ask people to go to maybe a few couples, and then bring their kids, go to a restaurant, something like that.
Yeah.
Or some other people I'm interested in. People, I got my online business people that I hang out with. My wife does nothing to do with that. We'll go do a hangout on our own. I asked you to come to vacation with. You didn't answer me back, but whatever. I'll ask you again. Maybe you blow me off.
First strike.
And it's not timing. Timing is not right for
Yeah,
everybody.
yeah,
But the idea is if you're continually doing this,
yeah.
and I think one mistake is, yeah, you have your kids' baseball team, you have your professional organization you go to, you have this club. Some people feel like, all right, yeah, it's awesome. I know everybody there. But I feel like it's important to go deeper with certain individuals. I think the idea is it's all a funnel system. Like you go to these clubs, you go to this gym, there's all these people, there's 100 people. And out of those 100 people, you may have to try and instigate something with 20 of them, and only 10 of them will come through. And over the years, you lose one of them.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
that's a pipeline.
We talked about like going beneath the surface and getting to the real talk. So that's the next tip is find a way to shorten the path to real talk. So when you get a chance, ask a question, for example, that's one level deeper, or answer honestly when someone asks you a question that is designed to go deeper. I think most of us were actually craving deep connection. What I found in my own personal experience is that when I show vulnerability and when I actually go out on a limb, I'm usually just astounded by the response I get or the people that come up to me afterwards and they want to get to know me.
You have to force yourself to put it out there. It's not because some
Yeah.
people are like, they just let everything out. Like, it's like too
Yeah.
much information.
Yeah. Be strategic. You don't want to be that person that just overshares. Yeah.
I got another theory here. So the thought is some people out there are all day long gravitating to problems. And then they are addicted to, they get that positive feedback loop of they going into deep in focus in solving problems, or issue resolution is another term for it. And that could be you saying people like to talk about deep topics, but they just like to solve problems too, where they don't need the other person to bawl their eyes out. So I think there's two different types of people in there. The latter is driven by curiosity, and then the other is driven by the need to connect or feel special because they know they've got that connection. They're intimate. They know a secret about you. So some people, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but that's just a motivation of some people. And I think I'm a little bit more of, hey, if we don't got a problem, I don't need to solve it. We don't need to solve it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think my theory is like either some people like to go emotionally deep or just have deep thoughts. I think it is a difference between the ENTJ or ENFJ. The T and the F are like the differentiator of the two.
Yeah.
Both are extroverts.
You're talking about the Myers-Briggs,
Right.
like the 16 different types of like personality types. Yeah.
But yeah, there's some nuances to it.
Yeah. So next tip is just accept the awkward phase, especially for those of us who might feel rusty. So just accept the fact that early interactions can oftentimes feel one-sided or forced. This is especially true if you're trying to be the one who's initiating the contact, right? But that's normal. But just accept it that it's normal to feel awkward because most people quit right before it gets good. So just remember to push through the first several hangouts, make it past the first few, and then that's usually where the magic happens, right?
Yeah, I do think that people's social economic positions do impact things. I do see that some people who have more money or status than others will filter who they would like to interact with. And that may not be right or wrong, but it is what it is. So that is a dynamic that I do see out there. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Depends on where you're at, right? Like you and I are in very different parts of the world, different places, right?
I think this is one of these like subtopics that we could easily talk a really long time about. There's data on generally what men and women typically go for, right? Not, again, this is like really broad generalization. In general, I think economic considerations are definitely like a very, even if it's beneath the conscious, it's a very strong part of what women are looking for in men. And I know I might get some hate for saying this, and less so for men, right? But I think the latest statistics I've read is that, like, for about 75% of women, like the economic viability of a potential mate is considered very important, and for about 25% of men, it's deemed very important.
What do you observe out there? Not reflective of yourself, but what do you see people doing out there? Do people who go to the country club, are they less attuned to hanging out with people who don't? What are you observing out there?
I think there's truth to that too. Right? I think there is something to be said about like people, folks in like higher socioeconomic circles. They tend to gravitate to those in a similar circle, and there's practical reasons for that, right? And
Like if you want their kids to hang out with your kids, that's obviously practical reasons behind.
so I think it's natural for folks to be drawn to people in a similar socioeconomic circle. Likewise, traditionally, if we were talking about marriage, usually traditionally, the parents also had a say in looking out for their son or daughter and who they marry. Because in the case of a dad, he's been around. He knows what's considered like a quality guy versus someone who's not so high quality. And if he's advising his son or daughter who might not have as much life experience, he's gonna give his input. Likewise for a mother who's had a lot more life experience than let's say someone who's in their 20s and then looking to settle down. right?
I different topic, but I see some people who only want to interact with people that are higher level or at a certain level. I think that makes a lot of sense. But I think what also made me reflect on was we were at that temple and it was like, what is the meaning of rich life? I think was the speaking
Hmm.
prompt. But a lot of the discussions were around like at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Like all this money and stuff doesn't really matter. It all comes down to like yourself and your family
Yeah.
and those people who are closest to you. That it is a shame if you're like into your 70s and 80s and you're still trying to play this chessboard game of social economic climbing the hierarchy. I
Yeah.
think I get it. At some point, it's important, but at some point, it just becomes very irrelevant as you start to age.
One potential drawback, one potential danger of intentionally only befriending people who are at the same or higher socioeconomic level is that number one, it's almost like a bit too intentional, right? It's like rather than letting something happening organically. And then number two, this creates the danger that you get into a bubble, right? And then you lose touch of all the other things out there. And going back to that exercise at the temple during the retreat of what defines a rich life, at the end of the day, what most of us realize, it's not about like the measurable stuff, right? It's not about like the net worth or the numbers. Like, it's a lot more holistic. Yeah.
I have a hard time. I don't even have a true understanding of it either, but it's this like discussion of do you want to be things to be more homogeneous, similar like-minded people, or do you want this person to guide you or being that outside new opinion?
Yeah.
I think people are different on this spectrum. It can also be said with like your romantic relationships too, where you want to have the similar value sets, but some people also put more emphasis on I want them to push me further or out of my comfort zones. Something that I haven't heard people talk about very much, but
Yeah.
pops into mind. It's like, are you looking for friends who can bring out new opinion, or is it just what they do for you? Not in a
Hmm.
selfish way, but it's at the end of the day, what are we looking for? Is it just connection, or what is the goal?
Yeah, I think that's really well said.
And I don't know.
Yeah, food for thought. So the last tip, and this is for folks who really want quick results. If that's what you're looking for, then try enrolling in something like a certification course, an intensive course, or a mastermind group that is on something that you're generally interested in. If we think about it, if you enroll in like a certification course, right, something that's let's say 5 days or a week, you can rack up those hours like really quickly, right? And so this is like one of the highest yield moves for really busy adults, especially for type A people who are always looking to improve themselves. You
Other thing
want,
is get rid of the if you've tapped it dry, go to a new watering hole and cancel that one to clear up your schedule to make room for something new.
whether it's a professional credential, like skill-based program, or something like, let's say you're really into investing, right? So do an intensive course on like advanced investing strategies, right? And if you're into yoga, go take a yoga certification course. If you're into like leadership training, do that. Fitness coaching, there's so many different possibilities, right? But essentially, you're putting yourself in a structured environment that delivers this built-in repetition and also shared goals, right? You're going to be with people who are self-selecting themselves to be there, who are investing time and skin in the game to better themselves. And this is a really high yield way to create an ecosystem where you have a really good shot of being in the trenches with other folks, undergoing like a shared goal, working towards an achievement. And oftentimes you'll make really good friends at these events, and it's a great way to turn acquaintances into solid friends.
Going through something together, you can also join like a board position or a volunteer group. I know there's a lot of opportunities for that elsewhere. And I always wonder why people do that other than
Mhm.
get it on their resume, which why would they even care about a resume at that point in their career?
Yeah.
You tend to find people who are also searching for a bit of the same thing, but also looking to solve problems. And then it's not always easy. So that's where the engineered struggle comes in.
I think that shared struggle is a really important piece because as the saying goes, you're like people have been who have been in the trenches together. That's a lifelong bond, right? To be with somebody who has been through the same challenge as you, that's something that never goes away.
Yeah.
And
College is hard, right? That's kind of be one of those trenches. But if you haven't had something like that in the last decade, maybe it's time to dive into another trench.
Lastly, for the single listeners out there, a lot of these principles that we've talked about also apply to romantic relationships as well. Oftentimes, when we talk about romantic relationships, oftentimes it seems like the stakes are higher, right? But the general principles that we talked about here are very much in play. Right? So these principles of engineered repetition, shared experiences under light pressure, gradual vulnerability, and just accepting early awkwardness, right? A lot of these are very applicable to dating, right? So a lot of relationships that go the distance actually start as low pressure friendships first, but then evolve naturally, right? So it's no surprise that a lot of the relationships and marriages that go the distance, one of the secrets that they'll talk about is that, hey, first and foremost, they're best friends. Yeah. So a lot of these concepts that we're talking about here also apply, especially for our single listeners.
Yeah. It's tough though because you don't know who is also single out there. Whereas when you're making friends, everybody's got a best friend.
Yeah.
Where, yeah, if you're finding a romantic partner, it's like you don't necessarily have it written on your name tag that you're
Mm,
taken or not. I guess you used to put it on your Facebook page, but who uses that anymore?
yeah.
So go to the apps.
I don't know about that.
All right. I guess we tossed a lot of things around. Unless there's any other thoughts, Poe. Thanks, guys, for listening. If you guys have any other suggestions, actually, do us a favor, go and rate review the show. It helps us find other people that want to listen, and maybe we'll do one of these events in the future with people that are also like-minded so you can meet people on similar wavelengths into this stuff. But yeah, just the fact that you're listening to the end here shows that you are not adverse to this idea. And just know, I would probably say you're a bit of a minority out there. A lot of people, they go through life just trying to get by, just trying to pay the bills. They don't want to do what Paul said and join like a club or something like that because it just takes up time that they don't have. I would probably say if you're looking to do that for the richer things in life, such as a new friendship, I would say consider yourself lucky.
All right. Thanks for listening, guys, and thanks everyone for your support. See you in the next episode.